To share your weakness is to make yourself vulnerable. To make yourself vulnerable is to show your strength. Chris Jemmy. Welcome to the Applied Awareness Podcast, where you join me, Adam French, on my journey of expanding my awareness of self and the world around me. Then find creative ways to apply that awareness to live a more successful and fulfilling life. In this episode 5, Mental Health and the Self, I talked to Asu student, entrepreneur, and author, Patience Dorman, and we have a candid discussion about the inner workings of mental health issues. We talk about the hidden, deceptive nature of mental health issues and how people with these issues can come in all shapes and sizes. We also discuss the significant role of vulnerability in creating positive momentum and personal strength. Patience is very self-aware about her own struggles and has a lot of wisdom to share for people who may be dealing with similar issues. So I recommend taking a listen if you want to learn more about how you can manage your own inner chaos, or any advice you can give to friends that may be dealing with the same thing. Let's get started. I'm here. It's a beautiful night on the ASU campus in Tempe, Arizona, and I am with Patience Dorman. How are you doing today?
Hello, I am great. You can sit outside and it's not too cold. So
Not too cold. Thanks for the desert, but in the summer, it's definitely some downsides. So you want to introduce yourself? Just tell people what you're passionate about, what drives you.
Yeah. So my name is Patience. I am super passionate about way too many things, but
I can relate to that.
That includes writing, design, art, entrepreneurship, technology. But one of the most prevailing of all of those, and kind of what I would like to integrate into anything I do, is mental health, especially that of eating disorders, and just making an impact on the huge amount of body image and food problems in our world. I have a huge heart for that. I have a book about it. I used to intern for a app called the Kaya app that was all about mental health and teen girls. So yeah, that's my thing.
You said you wrote a book about it?
Well, the book was about my experience.
Okay.
So I actually started it just as journaling, and then it kind of morphed into I'm not going to finish this unless I make an end goal. So I said I was just going to write a book kind of journaling my experience through my eating disorder, and how I recovered and kind of found faith from that. And so my senior year of high school, I wrote that and shared it with a couple people in my school, and then kind of went around school real quick, and slowly but surely kind of blew up in my little town.
Nice.
So I figured out how to self-publish via Google, and
wow.
Yeah.
That's
yeah,
awesome. So
yeah.
Where, if you're comfortable disclosing this information, where can people find your book?
Yeah, you can find it on Amazon. It's called Food, Faith, and Facing My Fears.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Wow. You never told me you had a book before.
I don't really just throw that out there.
Okay. But you just did.
No, yeah. It's definitely, I think it's I kind of haven't pursued it since being in college. But it was a huge part of my senior year, and was for sure the experience I accomplishment I take the most pride in, I guess, but more so just because it's probably the thing I've done that I feel has positively impacted the most people.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Rockstar. That's why I have people like you on.
Surprise.
All right, so just to kind of start it off, what are some misconceptions that you've experienced personally and that you've seen maybe in your group or in your network about mental health in general? What do people think about mental health, or how do they perceive of it in ways that are incorrect?
hmm I think just on a general level, like mental health at the end of the day is mental, it's in our heads.
Yeah.
And so anytime that people try to put a certain um, appearance on mental health is wrong, whether it's just, well, they look happy, they're smiling all the time, like there's no way they have depression, or they're super fit, like there's no way they are having like body image issues, or even the same of like, oh, they're super big, there's no way they're having like anorexia. Like anytime you apply a certain way someone should look to what's going on in their head, I think is super wrong, because
Absolutely.
yeah, I think so. Some more like, I guess, stigmas of mental health. I mean, I think, yeah, just characterizing like a certain person to be the only person that experiences mental illness.
Okay, so saying like someone who has a mental illness is like this type of
Right.
person.
Right.
Okay.
Because I think you always hear those stories about, I mean, Kate Spade and all these celebrities who come out and have horrible mental illnesses, and we would have known nothing about it. And I think those are like just really good testaments to the fact that it has nothing to do with like the outward expression.
Absolutely.
Not even necessarily what they say, or especially not what they look like, but it's mental. It's in your head.
So basically this stigma or misconception is that people don't understand that mental illness is, at the end of the day, intrinsically something that is within a person, and your perception of that person, even if someone's sad, you'd be like, oh, they're depressed. Well, no, they're not depressed, they're sad.
Right.
And it's something that happens within a person that their outward appearance doesn't really belie that a lot of the times. And you might see it in their eyes, right? But that's within them. That's why you see it in their eyes and not their face and not their body.
Right. Yeah. I think we just like I'm not saying we do this like it's a bad thing we do. I think we are trying to like make sense of things. We want a reason to feel like we wouldn't go through the same things. And so if they look happy, then like
we talk about it, those people, because we're scared that we might be experiencing that.
Right. So we don't want to see that like another like smiling person is having a horrible experience. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, it could be anyone.
Right.
So that kind of dichotomy about the outer state not being an indication of the inner state, I think that's something that's especially prevalent in the realm of, or the category of, eating disorders, because people say, oh, that's a physical disability or illness, right? But that's a mental illness, correct?
Correct. I mean, eating disorders, at the end of the day, even saying out loud, what is it but disordered eating? And so it has nothing to do with a certain body shape or a certain weight or anything. I think my experience was a very good indicator of that, of not necessarily my body. Maybe people could have assumed eating disorder from my body, but my outward expression of myself really tamed any fears that people had about me. So in high school, it was like my senior year that I had this, but it was very much a healthy thing, and I made sure everyone know that it was like healthy. That being said, it was an eating disorder because I was, my mind was imprisoned by this idea of healthy, and I couldn't budge from it, and I would get mad at myself for skipping a workout or having an M&M or something. So it is like nothing to do with I was eating. Like I didn't have any of the popularized things. And I'm not saying this out of a self-bragging or anything of that. I'm saying this out of like, you really never know. But I mean, senior year, I was going to Arizona State. I was homecoming queen. I was student body president, and like totally competent, totally capable, totally could talk to you about how I used to exercise too much while I was still doing the same thing right then and there. And I didn't realize it at the time. Like, it was truly a mental illness because I truly thought I was healthy in a stage that I was, like, wildly unhealthy. And
interesting.
Yeah.
So the unhealthiness seems to be that you were afraid or ashamed of indulging yourself, right? And taking a break and kind of letting go.
Right.
Okay. And, I mean, I think that has a lot to do with the context you are raised in. Like, what does healthy look to anyone? I mean, what you just described is like what's on fucking Women's Health and Men's Health.
Right. Yeah, that's another freaking thing that adds to it is our media and society are always constantly sending messages about, cut out this, lose weight this way, gain muscle this way, eat this, not this, be vegan, be whatever. And so, like, to me, I felt like I was doing everything right.
Yeah.
Because that's what, like, I truly couldn't believe that, like, nobody was, like, I couldn't believe that people were just happy with their body, or, like, I couldn't believe that people, like,
could
weren't
settle,
constantly, maybe? Yeah.
Could be content.
Right. I thought that, like, this was the goal that everyone was looking at, and if people did, like, kind of criticize me or, like, ask me about, like, my mental health, like, I truly thought they were, like, a little mad that, like, they couldn't lose weight or things like that. If that makes sense.
Yeah. So, I mean, the mental illness, I mean, I think it shows up wherever it is. It's not possible without a certain lack of self-awareness.
Right.
And if you're completely self-aware and you know what thoughts are causing what emotions and what other people's actions are causing your emotions and why that's happening, I think you don't have the chance to develop these patterns of thought.
Right.
The negative patterns of thought that can, turn into not being able to treat yourself.
Right.
And what were some of the consequences of that? I mean, was it just the chaos in your own mind, or was it kind of being super high strung all the time because you couldn't let yourself go, or what?
Right. I think it's funny because I think I would have seemed. I think you're probably, like, picturing a different me. It was really the same me on the outside, pretty much. I could talk the same talk. I had the same, like, interests and still super ambitious and everything, but I thought it was like freaking Superwoman, honestly. Actually, I was probably more motivated than I am now. Actually, for sure. But I think the lack of self-awareness was, I think at the heart of it all, I knew that, like, something was off, but I, like, didn't want to admit that, and I was choosing control over, like, full awareness, if that makes sense. I was choosing...
It was fear.
Right.
Fear of the unknown.
Right. Consequences of that were anxiety, very bad, like, panic attacks happened toward the end of it, towards, like, the worst stages. And on a physical level, very messed up hormone levels. And, yeah, I mean, I could go very into that, but...
You probably write about it in your book, right?
I do, indeed. Yeah, you can check it out there.
Will do.
On a surface level, I thought I was self-aware. I thought I was very motivated in things, but I think there was a self-awareness that I knew I didn't want to
fully embrace.
Right. Yeah.
Interesting. There's a common pattern to me between mental health, self-awareness, and fear. And in the earlier stages of mental illness, people know something is a little bit off, but they don't quite want to admit to themselves that something is a little bit off. You know, it's
Right.
they use self-acceptance as kind of a band-aid.
Right. Yeah.
While self-love, you know, some things you love, you have to push at. You have to sacrifice some pleasure. You know, you have to feel some pain to really uncover the things that you love. So I think there are a few distinctions from what you're saying that need to be made, and that's from, I mean, motivation and self-awareness is one. People think, oh, I'm motivated, I know what drives me. That's not quite the whole picture.
Right.
You know, you have to know, you know, what's under the fire.
Right.
Right. The second distinction that needs to be made is between
Yeah.
the self-acceptance that you were talking about,
Right.
that you felt as almost a band-aid, was a certain one-dimensional self-acceptance. Real self-acceptance
Right.
is when you know your flaws
Right.
and you embrace your flaws,
Right.
and you make the effort to become aware of those flaws.
Yeah.
That's real self-acceptance.
Right. I think real self-acceptance, I mean, for me in that was really coming to terms with the fact that, like, the people that like love me don't love me for the way I look, or like really accepting the fact that, like, I was gonna have to gain weight or look different, and like was going to have to be okay with that. I think the idea of self-acceptance sounds great, but it's always a lot harder and scarier, and it means
Absolutely.
diving into the things that you don't want to accept.
Absolutely. And that's a skill, that's a ability. That's what makes the great people great. You know, the great entrepreneurs are the ones who are willing to dive into the unknown. And that can be done on a like industry level, where I want to do this startup in this industry that I have no clue, you know, what I'm doing in. And that battle can be done on a personal level. And I think that to kind of transition here into internally dealing with your own mental illness, I think that self-acceptance and that ability to leap into the unknown of your fears of who you might not be, and your fears of what you might lack or what you suffer with, diving into that is kind of the first step to really becoming great on a very internal, intrinsic level. And what was the thing for you that triggered, like, oh, these things that I've been pushing aside, these things that I've been too scared to look at, what pushed you to say, it's time to be straight up with myself?
So there's honestly a long line of like little things that happen, but I think one of the biggest ones that super related, so I'll talk about it, was I claim it as the day that my life flipped around, was when I was listening to some health podcast, and it was this girl, her name's Maddie Moon, she still makes podcasts, so check her out.
All right.
But she was just describing her experience and how she had gone too far down the health path, and used to be a fitness model and had turned sane since. And I just remembered, like I was saying earlier about all the things in society that are saying, like, be healthy, lose weight, blah, blah, blah. Like, this was such a simple message, but it, like, felt like the first time I had ever heard anyone saying anything against that grain. And she, like, held no details back. I think that was a big thing too, was she wasn't just like, oh, I used to struggle with this. I mean, she, like, told her raw story.
Yeah.
And realizing, like, some of those really raw details that I never wanted to admit in myself, she said, that just, like, rocked my world. Then after that, I found that there was, like, this whole community of people doing the same thing. I mean, there was a whole community of people who had experienced the exact same things that I did, like, almost scarily. And so I kind of became obsessed with that, and
Yeah. You still are, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think, so that being said, I think vulnerability is like one of the biggest ways. I was just listening to something today that was like, if you're only telling the 99% of yourself to everyone around you, then like you're still unknown, and like that 1%, that one thing that you're hiding, that's probably what you need to dive into. That's probably what's holding you back. And
Yeah.
for me, I think that's true. When I let that like 1% go, it was like the weight of the world was lifted off my shoulders. It's also all the same as she was vulnerable, and like that was how I recognized that in myself.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of things I wasn't even necessarily aware that I did, but once I heard them come out of her mouth,
You were able to identify them.
Right. So I think being vulnerable, both for yourself and for other people, is super important for mental health.
And that vulnerability is the same as accepting your whole self with all your flaws. It's the same as leaning into your fears of the unknown, of that unknown 1%, and exposing it to yourself, and then when you're comfortable, to the world. And for some people, it's the same thing. I think for you, from what you've said, it was kind of the same journey. I mean, it always starts within, but that grows by spreading it and getting other people's messages of vulnerability. So maybe the way to manage mental illness, especially with eating disorders, although a lot of mental illness, it's the same thought patterns that occur. Maybe one very powerful way to use your own power, use your own wisdom to move past that and to beat it is to be vulnerable with yourself and be vulnerable with others. Find a friend that you love and trust and tell them everything. Tell them everything that you struggle with. Tell them, the chaos in your mind. Just find someone that listens. Record it, Just do anything in your power to expose it.
Right.
And once you expose it, it's not as scary anymore, right? Is that kind of...
Right. Yeah, I've heard... I always think of this phrase that, like, shame thrives in the darkness and in secrecy. And the problems, whether it's anxiety, whether it's shame from anything, are just going to continue to build unless you shine a light on them. And it's going to hurt and it's going to feel horrible and uncomfortable. But you have to bring them out,
I think any process of growth feels that way. I think when I started development, web development, I was like, I can't do this. I see so many people that are better than me. I'm reading all these articles, but I'm not absorbing the information. It feels like I'm not going anywhere, and that's how it is, on entrepreneurship. That's exactly how I felt. And it's the same journey, just on a different level. It's becoming aware of where you are weak, and for some people, they know, for some people, they struggle with depression on a level where they know about it, they're telling people about it, but they can't make it go away with that. So, I mean, for you, did it kind of go away once you started telling people, or was there more to the story?
This is a thing that people say a lot of times, that you can never totally get rid of an eating disorder. It's not like drugs or alcohol and you can just stop. Like, you always are going to eat, and that's always going to be a trigger. But tying into the theme of the message, I mean, fast forwarding a bunch of years, I think, or not that many years, but
a couple years.
Yeah. People always ask me, like, do you still struggle? And I think, like, yes, for sure, all the time. Like, there is no denying that food is all around, and, like, the media is all around. Like, I'm a human. But truly, the difference is I'm aware of the things that I'm aware of my triggers. I'm aware of um, just the things that I do, and I can catch it so much quicker now.
Okay.
And I know how to turn it around. I don't like necessarily believe that, when people are like, it will go away. I don't necessarily think that, like, especially if you struggled with a mental illness for a long time, like, that it will necessarily just go away. But I think being self-aware and knowing how you feel in those circumstances, knowing like healthy ways to get out of it, and to move on to that bubble. I mean, example, if I'm ever having like a moment with food and things, like immediately turn to like, okay, what can I like create? Like, how can I just move on to the next thing? And
interesting.
Yeah.
So you become aware of the cause and effect of your own disorder, and then you start creating strategies to break that negative spiral.
Right.
Interesting. Obviously, that's not a foolproof solution. I mean, a friend of mine struggles with depression to the point where there's no rhyme or reason to it. Nothing triggers it. It just happens and he can't get out of bed,
Right.
And that kind of stuff is a much different beast.
Right.
But at the same time, there are so many people out in this world that have mental illnesses. Even if it's just for a day. Like, I've had nights where I'm like, I don't want to do anything but sit in my bed and cry because I just feel horrible about myself. And there was no real reason to it. It was just, I think everyone has those moments. Right. And especially for, again, the early stages where you're starting that spiral. If you're listening to this and you can relate to any of that, try to become aware of what triggers that spiral, and try to create hooks, try to create mantras, try to devise habits, whatever it may be, whatever works for you. Like, I can't be here. I don't think you can be here and be like, here's a top 10 list of habits to use.
Right.
I mean, there might be stuff like that. You might find it helpful, but we can't tell you what habits to use. You have to be knowledgeable of what you respond well to.
Right.
So it's that knowledge of cause and effect, right?
Right. I think these things are always an indication of a deeper problem, a deeper issue, a deeper fear or desire.
So keep digging.
Yeah. So I think keep digging, and there's deeper roots. Mine was all a need for, and like deep desire for control. You can bring it back to family and the way I was raised and all those things. But and then so I think there's always it's always the like, don't just settle with like it's the surface level. I think there's always somewhere deeper.
Well, I think that's a good point to wrap up with. Thank you so much for taking the time and the courage to tell your story, because that takes a lot.
Yeah, happy to do so. If anybody relates, this is my favorite thing to talk to people about.
What's your book again?
Food, Faith, and Facing My Fears.
Food, Faith, and Facing My Fears.
Triple F.
You can find it on Amazon. I'll put it in the show notes, and that'll wrap it up. That wraps it up for this episode of the Applied Awareness Podcast. I hope you're leaving more aware than when the episode started. For more on the episode today, you can check out our Medium publication at medium.com/appliedawareness. To reach out to me individually, you can tweet at me on Twitter at appliedpodcast, or email me at appliedawarennesspod@gmail.com. All of the previously mentioned methods of communication will be in the show notes. The next episode, we're going to switch gears a little bit, and I'm going to do a deep dive on the food industry and our eating habits in America. This is the beginning of a string of episodes on food and knowing your food and being aware of how you consume food and where it comes from. I've been really excited to do this. I've been wanting to rant about the food industry and its flaws for some time now, uninterrupted. with a lot of research behind it. So there's going to be a lot of facts, statistics, and analysis of those statistics there's going to be a lot of facts and statistics that pertain to the state of the food we're eating in America, how it's produced, and the effects it has on our bodies, the environment, and our ability to function as a society. Newsflash, it isn't looking great. But there is hope. So tune in to the next episode to learn all about our food industry and the flaws and benefits associated with the industry. It's going to be really exciting. I really want y'all to check this out because it's something I'm super passionate about. Food matters a lot, and I'm going to be talking a lot about that. So next episode, check it out. If you enjoy the show today, please subscribe and leave a rating wherever you're listening to the show. I really appreciate it, and it helps me out a lot in growing the podcast and getting more people's ears on it and getting more people aware. So please rate and subscribe wherever you're listening to it right now. I appreciate you in advance.